You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NAX. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
You know, we hear about electric vehicles all the time. Governments around the world have mandated that, or have suggested strongly that automakers must sell them. However, in the U.S., EVs only account for less than 2% of all car sales. While global investment in EVs is hitting new heights, consumer awareness and adoption of this technology really hasn't kept pace. What combination of features, infrastructure, and innovation will achieve the tipping point and really capture the hearts and minds of consumers? That's what we'll cover today. I'm Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute, and I'm joined today by my co-host.
Hey, everybody. I'm John Eichberger with the Fuels Institute and NAX, and I'm happy to be here, Donovan, on this great topic.
Thanks, John. Same here. Now, before we dive into it, I want to note that things are a bit different today. We are both working remotely from makeshift home recording studios, but still have the same high-quality audio that we always have. Also, we are recording on April 21st, and that's important to state just in case there are developments that change anything we are discussing today. But now, today we are joined by Mike Dvorny, Vice President, Automotive and Mobility, and Jacob Dittmer, Senior Director of Technology, both from Escalent, a human behavior and analytics firm. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Donovan.
Thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it. So just to get us started, not everyone knows exactly what your organization does. Mike, tell us a little bit about Escalent.
Happy to do so. Yeah, Escalent, basically we're a human behavior and analytics firm. So essentially, it's about understanding and harnessing human beings and what they do and their behavior to help companies better understand how to navigate disruption or to create strategies for things that are happening in the future.
Got it. I kind of came across your company because, again, I'm always looking for the latest or things that are happening in terms of consumer reaction to new technology and just vehicle transportation market in general. And your latest white paper I came across, really enjoyed it, The Future of EVs, How to Capture the Hearts and Minds of Consumers. The part about it that I like the most is that it highlighted the strengths of automakers. The fact that automakers create that emotional connection. I think about when I purchase a new car, that smell, the types of brands that people may have. Some may like BMW, some may like Japanese cars. Whatever it is, there's an emotional connection that can last for generations. But it also suggested that automakers could learn a lot from tech companies. Could you guys, maybe Mike or let's go with Jacob, could you explain what that really means?
Sure, I'll chime in on that. So I think the idea with learning from tech companies is, that they've obviously gone through major disruptions over the past several decades, right? From the advent of the personal computer to the internet to mobile devices as sort of the primary computing source of our lives. And so the lesson there is major disruptions only over about 30 years, whereas automotive space hasn't really, it's had some change, but at the same time, the internal combustion engine hasn't evolved a whole lot in about 100 years. So I think that's one of the main things we really wanted to present in this paper, was saying, hey, we've talked to these consumers out there, and they're obviously interested in electric vehicles. There's some appeal, but there's also a bit of a gap, I think, that needs to be addressed from the automotive side, perhaps.
Hey guys, this is John. One of the things I picked up in reading the report was that it seems like consumers are saying, look, if we're going to be interested in a new technology like this, don't sell it to us like you've sold cars for the last 100 years. Seems like a new marketing strategy focusing on different attributes seems to be kind of what the consumers might respond to. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit more?
Sure. I think I can add a little bit, and I'm sure Mike might have something to add too, since we both kind of bring a little bit of different specialization to this particular topic. But as far as your question with regards to the marketing of it, I agree that there's something to be learned, again, perhaps from tech, that it's about maybe kind of changing our relationship to the device, if you will, the car being a device in this case, and it's sort of like, imagining the car not so much as a transportation vehicle, but also perhaps some sort of hub for your daily life, or maybe a connected piece to your work life and things like that. There's other ways of maybe imagining what the car can do for you. And so much of what's been marketed sort of over the recent decades with regards to cars has been more about how we kind of identify ourselves with the car, the sort of independence of the road, that free spirit piece that I think is definitely drawing in a lot of consumers, but it's nevertheless maybe a little bit of a disconnect from what the electric vehicle is bringing to the table, perhaps.
Would you agree with that, Mike?
Absolutely. And, one other thing I'd add to that is that we recently did a large body of research where we talked to over 10,000 people, and we essentially had a couple findings that were pretty interesting to us related to, for instance, what are some common messages around EVs of that, hey, we want to get the message out there that they're good for the environment. And what we found is essentially everybody knows that. So don't waste your time trying to talk about the environmental benefits of an EV. It's about understanding that there are different buyers of EVs, and those different buyers have very different concerns, and the messages need to vary a lot too. So, for instance, some of the buyers are incredibly motivated by styling and performance, very emotional type aspects of it. Whereas you have other buyers who, they're very interested in EV, but they have really deep concerns about, hey, if my cell phone battery degrades after 3 years, what should I expect from an EV? What does maintenance look like? And so it's really understanding those differences and not trying to have a one-size-fits-all strategy for all of them.
And, one of the things I like about what your organization does, and I can kind of brag about the Fuels Institute as well, we talk about how we really represent the entire industry, all stakeholders. We want to bring them all to the table, whether you're a consumer, government, automaker, fuel retailer, whatever it is, bring it to the table and really have solutions that help everyone, specifically the consumer. And the same thing with Escalent on your kind of your mission statement. You talk about looking at human behaviors, turning those into ideas that make the world work better for people. So just to give our audience some background, your focus isn't so much on just pushing EVs or pushing a certain technology, but it's more so, here's technology that people like. Let's see how we can kind of bridge that with how people actually react to things. And I say all that to kind of bring up the comparison you use in your report or the white paper. It talks a lot about the Apple iPhone. Why in particular did you use the iPhone as kind of the comparison in terms of consumer adoption? And I'll leave that one for Mike. We'll start off with.
Well, thanks. Actually, that's an area where Jacob will do a little better talking to that, given his experience with the white papers. Jacob, why don't you go ahead and lead with that, and I'll add on.
Sure. Yeah. So the iPhone piece came out of when we got these data back from this particular study and fielding it, we were kind of struggling with like, okay, there's some obvious gaps here, some issues that we want to talk about with regards to the industry. We also want to bring in this tech perspective, showing a little bit of what Escalent can do through the merger of our industry groups and specialization that we bring to the table. So it dawned on us that there's a really useful framework that has been used many times over in studying disruptive industries, technology being the obvious recent one that, as I was describing, industries that are in disruption. And the iPhone is just a really, really clear-cut example of a major switch that many consumers can all understand, as well as our stakeholders, the folks that are going to read this paper. They can understand what the iPhone did to the market by just having experienced it themselves, I'm sure, or holding it in their hands, right? If you think about it, you take the idea of a phone and then you the mobile phone itself, but then you compress a computer into that's connected to the internet. So you're able to do all of the internet mobile connected pieces, as well as you throw in a camera. And so by that point, you've kind of converged 3 or 4 different key pivotal use cases for everyday life into one particular device. And it really transformed just the consumer life. Now, look at it from the infrastructure side of things. It also transformed infrastructure. It put a lot of burden on the internet itself because more and more people were now connected in mobile locations. It put a burden on the telecom networks. It required more connectivity in that regard. It helped kind of burgeon a cloud industry with regards to, again, having more connected devices and internet being more prevalent in everyday life. So it really disrupted both sides of the equation with regards to infrastructure and the consumers themselves. Now, we utilized a very familiar framework that we're referred to. So everyone who's been through business school knows or is familiar with Everett Rogers' study that examined disruptive technologies, and that there are these 5 features of a disruptive industry or disruptive force in the market. And so we use those 5 particular features as a way to showcase, again, how the iPhone disrupted with some of the examples I just shared, and then looked at it with regards to how EV is charting a similar path, where there are some areas that are very clear, some features that are clear, and then some that need a little bit of work. Some that are maybe some areas for the industry to look at and to address with regards to those adoption factors.
So guys, this is Johnny. I'm looking at the study directly and thinking about the evolution of consumer behavior and mobility. The Fuels Institute launched an electric vehicle council beginning of this year to start looking at a variety of factors, regulations, what site host of charging infrastructure, what they need to be aware of, what consumer behavior looks like. And there's 2 metrics here that I want to point out that I thought were fascinating. And one is, we all know that the 3 main detriments to consumer adoption of EVs is cost, range, and recharge time. And your study puts that at 74, 68, and 73% of consumers are all citing those as, I don't know about if a BEV is going to be right for me because of these things. Yet most people I talk to, and I agree with this, in the next 4 or 5 years, a lot of those things are going to be resolved. And you're going to have vehicles with 350, 400-mile range at cost competitive with internal combustion engine, recharge time of under 10 minutes. And so I flip back to a later data set you have in your report where it shows that consumers in the U.S. believe in the next 5 to 10 years, their purchasing is going to be very different, that their purchase of petroleum vehicles will drop from 70% to 37% of consumers think they'll buy a petroleum-based vehicle, and electric vehicles up to 16%. So it looks like, and I'd like to get your thoughts on when you've interacted with these consumers in this methodology, are they recognizing that the technology is improving, or are they just kind of assuming that the market's going to evolve? I mean, is there a clear recognition that things are changing in terms of an electric vehicle's ability to satisfy their needs?
Because it does present an interesting, basically an environment when you realize, look, we've got these changes that are coming. And yet, we're in an era where there've been, over time, lots of projections that made it seem like EVs, they're really going to take off, and then it doesn't happen. So, what is the environment we're in right now? And so a couple things I can share about that to give a data-based sense of where we are is that there has been a relatively large change in people's perception of EVs. So even over the last couple of years, we really have, so we did a larger study, and effectively 85% of consumers were saying that they believe EVs are either the future or a very interesting idea. And over the last year, their opinion of EVs has actually improved. So kind of across the board in the marketplace, we're seeing that there's this positive kind of shift going on in people's perception of EVs. That said, we're really aware of the fact that gasoline vehicles don't present for most people much of a reason to get out of what they're used to. I mean, they work well and they function in people's lives. So, the big thing that we see on the horizon is the fact that we've got this, and exactly as you pointed out, John, this huge onslaught of vehicles that are coming with greater capabilities. They're coming in segments that are more attractive. When we talk to people and say, for your next vehicle, what are you likely to buy? Currently, we're seeing, and as you referenced, the vast majority of people are not considering a battery electric vehicle. When we ask those that, really, hey, tell us why that's not the case, the biggest reason we have why they haven't bought an EV yet, this is among a relatively large group of people that are essentially mentally convinced that it's the right idea, is that they're simply waiting for the right vehicle. Whether it's they have brand loyalties, or they're looking for a certain size, or they want the functionality. So for us, it puts us in an interesting situation now where as all these vehicles are coming, they're going to start appealing to a lot more people who've effectively, they're pretty open to the idea of an EV, but they haven't wanted to compromise what it is that they're actually driving.
I kind of want to build on that just a little bit. And let me know if I'm looking at this the right way, and anyone can answer this. It seems like, because John talks about this in one of his older presentations, maybe a year or two ago, where we usually use the iPhone as kind of the, hey, this is what people usually compare as the comparison for EV technology. People will adopt to EVs just like they did for the iPhone. It changed everything. But of course, there's a huge price difference in iPhones and vehicles. But there was a perceived advantage of getting an iPhone or a smartphone. Let's just use that term, a smartphone versus a flip phone. You had, like you said earlier, Jacob, you have your camera there now. You have your laptops there. Everything was added to your phone to kind of give a big benefit that the consumer could see that made it worth, as if it were as a learning curve of all. They took that learning curve. They were willing to do it because it was a benefit to them. Is there kind of in a similar aspect, you look at EVs, there just aren't enough immediate benefits for a consumer who's kind of on the fence to make that jump? Would you say that's fair? And I'll leave that for please.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that a little bit. I think that's interesting. The perceived benefits piece is clearly one that I think is sort of foremost for a lot of consumers that they wrestle with, because like you said already, the environmental and the lack, not relying on fossil fuels, the quieter drive experience, perhaps the sort of cool factor, with regards to it just being a totally different type of experience riding in the car, the torque, those sorts of things that we're familiar with when you look into the EV marketing. But there's also those other disadvantages, right? The range anxiety, the infrastructure charging is perhaps another one that a lot of folks get worked up about. And so I think that brings about one of those factors of disruption that we were just talking about in terms of the sort of trialability is what it's called, the ability for folks to try before you buy or experience it a little bit and realize how transformative of an experience it is. The thing that I think Apple did partly to help address this with the iPhone was they had these beautiful stores in city centers that you could walk into, anyone could walk into and pick up and start playing with this device. You could start doing Angry Birds or whatever and kind of experience the fun of the touch screen and the resolution and all of that sort of coolness quickly became apparent just by being able to interact with it. Well, it's not quite the same with cars. Yes, we can do test drives, but there's kind of a hump to that experience that we have to get over. We have to, physically go down to the store, interact with a salesperson, set up a test drive in some cases. So I think some of those pieces are limiting consumers' ability to really understand how sort of transformative and disruptive this technology is.
So just a couple things I'll add to that. One of the things that we do see is people who own EVs, they have the highest satisfaction among any car owners. They really, truly enjoy it. But part of the problem we have is how to get people to understand that before they've actually experienced it. Because it's harder to convince people you're going to love it, but you have to try it first. And that's where actually we see that knowing people who own an EV becomes one of the most important factors for whether or not you're going to consider one for your next vehicle. Because plenty of people are aware of them. And we do find that there is a correlation between being aware of EVs and on some level wanting to understand or check them out. But much more importantly, if you actually know somebody with an EV, because those people tend to be able to speak to, they can demystify it, and they can also speak to things that maybe you wouldn't believe in advertisement. It said that there are all these great benefits, but when somebody I know and trust talked about them, then that really got me thinking. So that's part of what we're doing as well, is trying to reshape some of the conversations that are happening around EVs to say, look, we need to approach some of these issues from a different way and with different tools if we're really going to try to drive change in this space.
I think that's hilarious, Mike, because I know a couple friends that have EVs, and they know I'm in the transportation sector, and I can't get them to shut up about it. They talk about it constantly. It's like they're bragging rights about their kids. It's like that's how important it is to them and how much and I've driven EVs, and they're fantastic. They're so much fun to drive, and I do believe that we're going to see growth. And I know we have a few minutes left, but I want to point out one more thing in your study and get your thoughts on it. 74% of consumers say that charging infrastructure in the U.S. must improve. And then you scroll down, and 45% of your respondents really think car makers bear the responsibility to do that. And I wonder if it's because there's just not that much infrastructure in the market. Putting my convenience store hat on, convenience stores sell gasoline 42 million transactions a day. That we service 160 million Americans come into a convenience store every day, and we're thinking about it. Hey, let's put the chargers at convenience stores. If that's where the drivers are going, why should we ask them to change their behavior? But I'm wondering if it's just because that hasn't been a reality, and they're looking at the market going, look, automakers, you want us to sell cars, you better give us opportunities to recharge them if we can't do it at home. Any thoughts in terms of that dynamic of who they think should be delivering charging infrastructure, and is it really just because they don't know what the future might look like and they're just kind of spitballing here, or what would cause them to think the automakers really need to deliver the charging infrastructure?
Well, I can chime in a little bit on that, actually, and then Mike, why don't you join in too? As far as the charging infrastructure piece, I think you're right that there's an interesting sort of discordance in the market space as to who's in charge of this, and I think part of why such a high number of consumers said this is on the manufacturers. There's two potential explanations there. One being, well, infrastructure also includes charging in the home. So if I purchase an EV, I assume the car manufacturer is going to give me the tools and the mechanism to make sure I plug this in. This isn't as simple as just a regular plug-in, is it? I think that for some consumers, there's a little bit of assumption there that that's going to come from the auto manufacturers. And then two being, I think it's an example of consumers seeing the role that the industry plays in pushing the new technology forward. And so if they really want to see that adoption take place, consumers are saying, well, you need to put your money where your mouth is and actually invest somewhat in a more visible and prevalent infrastructure. So that way I don't feel as anxious about it when I'm driving down I-5 or something like that.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say that our research, particularly our EV Forward study, has some interesting findings for the convenience store owners out there, in the sense that when you look at people that are likely to buy EVs, most of the charging they plan to do is at their home. For most people, they have the ability to do that. If you're a new car buyer, this is typically somebody who lives in the suburbs, traditionally a single family home. I mean, that's essentially who new car buyers tend to be. They can charge at home. So it has implications of, for charging that's going to happen away from the home. We know that charge time is incredibly important, because if you're out and about and you realize you don't have enough charge, or let's say you're going on a longer trip, the ability to stop and not have to spend an hour and a half somewhere, but spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes somewhere makes a big difference. But for us, that means that the way that convenience stores are arranged now and the behavior that people are used to is actually one that, from a charging standpoint, would work pretty well, particularly if there are faster chargers. So it's not necessarily trying to create spaces where people want to remain occupied for long periods of time while their vehicle charges, but to be able to, go to a level, 3 charger, a DC fast charger, and walk into a store and be able to get some refreshments and things like that and be on their way. So to us, it bodes well to hopefully the current model being able to adopt or adapt to EV charging, but otherwise continue to serve consumers the way that it has for so long.
Well, I think our listeners will definitely appreciate that answer there, Mike and Jacob. And just on behalf of John and I, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate the feedback. This has actually been exciting. I love the white paper. Can you tell us and our listeners, where can they actually get more information about Escalent, especially the research you're doing and the blogs you have?
Absolutely. I can speak to that. So our website, Escalent, EASCALENT.co, is where we have everything residing. And in that, we have an automotive section where you can go and find more information about the EV white paper that we did, about EV Forward, our large study on these next EV buyers, and a lot of different thought pieces around what's happening in the industry. Because for us, to the extent we are talking to, in any given year, many, many thousands of consumers, we enjoy being in that position of saying, hey, look, if you'd like a kind of pure sense of what the consumer is saying and wanting, we can help provide that.
Awesome. Great. And if anyone missed that, again, that's Escalent, ESCALENT.co. And you'll find all this information that we're talking about here and highlighting, and specifically this white paper, again, that we discussed this afternoon or today. So again, Jacob and Mike, we really appreciate you joining us and learning more about Escalent and really what consumers are thinking and how we need to adapt to what they want. And we'll see maybe an increase in EV technology as well as the EV adoption. And we thank all of our listeners for listening in again, and John, for you being here. And again, thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.